Now to the very latest in the Middle East, and President Trump telling Fox Business today that the war with Iran is, quote, very close to over. Efforts are reportedly underway to extend the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, which is set to expire next week. A Pakistani delegation arrived for talks in Iran today with the hopes of bringing both sides together for another round of negotiations. The White House believes the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports will force the regime to the table.
Iranians are going to try to engage in economic terrorism. We're going to abide by a simple principle that no Iranian ships are getting out either.
All vessels are advised to immediately return to port if leaving and discontinue transit to Iran if that is your next port of call. Do not attempt to breach the blockade.
Experts say that Iran can only sustain essential services for about 1 month under this blockade. The president adding there won't be a deal unless Iran gives up its nuclear program.
All right, for more, we're joined now live by Hal Kempfer, a retired Marine intelligence officer and the founder of Global Risk Intelligence and Planning. Hal, it's always good to have you on and get your perspective here. Let's talk about this blockade and what it looks like in the Strait of Hormuz or just beyond the strait here. It's focusing on all vessels either entering or leaving ports in Iran. So how is the U.S. military enforcing this blockade, and how effective has it been so far?
Well, Alex, according to the U.S. Central Command, it's been very effective. They said no ships have passed through the blockade, and there's been a number of confrontations where they've been warned to go away. In fact, in one case, a Chinese ship came all the way through the Strait of Hormuz, came up against our ships, decided to turn around and head back, and it's now in the waters off of the UAE. It's not just the Strait of Hormuz. You know, going into this, we kept hearing there's going to be a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. What it's turned out is it's a blockade on all the Iranian ports, so all the way down the Persian Gulf, through the Strait and into the Gulf of Oman, all of those ports blocking everything. And there's about 15 ships, as I understand, that are physically out there, you know, blocking these ports. And then, of course, there's 1 or 2 aircraft carriers we have in the area that are also in support of that. So it seems to be working fairly well. We're still waiting. There's some concerns about China maybe trying to push it, but we'll see.
Okay, so what are the effects of halting economic trade going into and out of Iran by sea?
Well, Heather, they are very dependent on a lot of things. Of course, they're dependent on that oil income coming out of Iran, which is no longer happening. They import a lot of goods. Interestingly, China was actually reportedly had a ship full of anti-aircraft missiles going to Iran. We made it very clear if they tried to do something like that, they'd get a 50% tariff, and they reportedly stopped, and those ships went back. But this is going to cause a lot of problems for Iran. They still import a lot of things that they need. And so it's not just the export side, but the demand side within Iran. They're going to have problems. And I think that's a reasonable thing to say. Within about a month, you're going to see the economy start to shut down.
Yeah, I mean, do you think this is going to have sort of the intended effect that the administration hopes it will have of forcing and putting enough pressure on Iran that they will, at the very least, extend this ceasefire?
Well, Alex, right now, the White House seems to be very positive. There's going to be new talks. The president's saying that he thinks this is going to be over soon. I think they feel that they may have come on to the right formula, which is the blockade, which is putting enough economic pressure on the regime that they're willing to deal with them. And, of course, they had the big talks in Islamabad led by the vice president. 21 hours of discussion. Nothing came out of that. Now there's talk. There's going to be another summit, not quite clear where. And, of course, Pakistan's field marshal, head of their military, went over and actually met with Foreign Minister Araghchi of Iran in Tehran. And so he kind of kept the pressure up as an interlocutor for the United States.
Okay, when you talk, though, about applying this pressure on Iran, they are, in fact, issuing some new threats. I mean, this is what they said just today. For the U.S. to continue its illegal action of imposing a naval blockade in the region and to create insecurity for Iran's commercial vessels and oil tankers, this action by the U.S. will constitute a prelude to a violation of the ceasefire.
Well, Heather, they're actually correct under international law. Blockade is considered an act of armed aggression, and so technically, if they were to say that this ends the ceasefire, they could. It's 2 parties in the ceasefire, so But the reality is that they seem to be abiding by the ceasefire. Now, they have to make threats. They have to do that for domestic consumption. They have to say, we're going to stand up and do things against the U.S. But the reality is they don't have a lot left. Their Navy, their big naval combatants are gone. They have the smaller boats, but they also realize we have capabilities to deal with those boats. They have some mines out there. We're demining the waters. We're going to get the Strait open fairly soon. So they're running out of things that they can use. Of course, they have ballistic missiles and drones, but they can't launch as many of those every day as they used to. So they recognize that probably diplomacy is the only path forward.
Yeah, and the last question here with just sort of the 30 seconds we have left, is there any sort of logistical challenges for the U.S. military in continuing to sustain this blockade on Iran?
Alex, great question. And from what I can see, no. We seem to be able to sustain it. Now, the Gerald R. Ford, which has been pulled out of theater, is heading back on what was its longest deployment. So they were kind of running on vapors, heading back to the U.S. But everything else out there seems to be doing fine, and we can sustain it for the weeks ahead.
Okay, we will be waiting and seeing if this new round of negotiations actually does take place. Hal Kempfer, really appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Alex.
All right, sure. Up next here on